What's going on, everybody? Jeff Holiday here, and today we got to talk about something very troubling, a very developing story that has come out from Florida, and it has people shook to the core for various different reasons. Now, in order to get the context of this, I think first let's just watch this news brief.
Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo is recommending against giving the COVID vaccine to healthy children. This is the first recommendation of its kind in the entire country. Ladapo making that controversial announcement today. He was at a roundtable discussion in West Palm Beach, one that the governor, Ron DeSantis, convened to discuss COVID-19 response, quote unquote, failures.
Now, there's a part in that I really want to emphasize. Ron DeSantis, the main squeeze in Florida, he wasn't just having a conference to talk about COVID, he was talking about COVID failures. Now, none of this is necessarily about public health. This is about politics. Oh yeah, make no mistake, this is all about politics. And unfortunately, as we have seen develop over the past 2 years, anti-vax denialism, but specifically pseudoscience and misbelief on COVID and COVID vaccines has become a hot ticket political issue. Now, all this comes down to one single man, that is Dr. Ladapo, and he is the Surgeon General for the state of Florida, and he is very much aggressively trying to tell people not to get COVID vaccinations. Rather, he's broadly saying not to get COVID vaccinations, but when pressed, says specifically the mRNA COVID vaccinations. And all of this is based on one single thing: a paper. He has the details, despite the fact that we have tons and tons and tons of data, many studies that do show that vaccination is safe. He found this one, and it must be the smoking gun, right? Right? Well, no. Now, before we get into that paper and what the problem is with it, I think it's very important to note that Dr. Ladapo, he was one of America's frontline doctors. If that sounds familiar, that's because America's Frontline Doctors was a group of wingnutty doctors that were signing off on all sorts of crazy COVID conspiracies, and they did a lot of public displays of rebellion against the system. Another example of this is Dr. Simone Gold, and Dr. Simone Gold, who stood side by side with Ladapo several times, she's an insurrectionist. She went to jail, like prosecuted and went to jail because she stormed the Capitol and went inside. Yeah. But if anything is really a condemnation of how much of an asshole and a dumb shit this Ladapo is, he signed onto the Great Barrington Declaration. Now, if you don't know what that is, that was a document signed by a very small amount of people that was basically saying the best way for us to deal with COVID is to try and get as many kids infected as possible so that they can produce herd immunity. Yeah. Real terrible idea. Like, it's actually hard to explain how bad of an idea that is and how anybody with a rational mind saw what a disaster that could actually be. But nope, he just happily signed on to it along with the rest of them. Again, this is all politics. This has nothing to do with, like, objective data and understanding immunology, virology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's politics. So let's take a look at this paper. Now, do you notice anything kind of strange about this paper? Just take a minute. Take a minute and look. Just try and take it in. Do you notice anything that might possibly be missing? Maybe up there at the top? Yeah, there's no list of authors. There's no list of where this study came from, who authored it, under what authority. Not one single person has actually written their name on this document. Nobody knows where it came from. Seriously, nobody knows where this came from. So let's wheel it back just a minute. You've got one of America's frontline doctors, which is a propagandist group of doctors who go against scientific consensus purely for the point of politics and propaganda. He then gets hired by DeSantis to be the Surgeon General. And also, I should probably point out, one of his mentors When they were asked to see if he would give a recommendation for him to be the Surgeon General, he said no. So you got this guy. He's now in the position, and he decides that he's going to find this paper, and he's going to then recommend that people don't get vaccinated. And the paper doesn't even have an author. Not one name. Where did it come from? Did somebody on Reddit write it? And he just found it and went, yeah, that looks about right. I mean, this is insane. And so along comes this paper, right? And now we have to deal with it. Now, what's fascinating about this, in the press release that Ladapo put out, okay, this analysis found that there's an 84% increase in the relative incidence of cardiac-related death among males 18 to 39 years old within 28 days following mRNA vaccination. Okay, that would be pretty concerning, right? It also casually mentions that non-mRNA vaccines were not found to have these increased risks. However, when they start talking about it, and I'll show you an example here real soon, when they start talking about it on the news programs, they don't make that distinction. They're just saying, should not get these vaccinations, not mRNA vaccinations. But I digress. So does this study show what they're trying to encourage you that it does? Well, the short answer is no. And the long answer is a very long way of saying no. But we're going to point out a couple of different things. One of the things that's really interesting about this is in their data set, they very specifically exclude people who died of COVID or COVID-related situations, comorbidities, et cetera, et cetera. They don't want that in the data, which is strange because if you're trying to talk about whether or not vaccines are safe, wouldn't you then compare it to people that died of COVID or did not die of COVID? Why would you exclude those numbers? Why wouldn't you have many different categories by which to look and extrapolate the data? Suspiciously, it's not there. And I do know why, but I'll tell you in a minute. Now, one of the other really fascinating parts about this study is that when they're looking at the data of people who died, well, first of all, they're not looking at their medical records. They're looking at their death certificate, which is a little strange. But also, there's very specific heart conditions that they're willing to look at, and then some that they don't, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. For instance, they'll look at something like died due to valve disease, okay? Now, there is no evidence and has never been any evidence that any vaccination has anything to do with valve disease. It wouldn't make any sense. That's one of quite a lot of examples of them just throwing that in there. And then they exclude others, and it is very strange. It's cherry-picking very specific data. And like the idea of valve disease being caused by the vaccination and them just chucking it in there is them relying on you not understanding any of the study. In fact, they really don't want you to look at the study at all. And even if you did, they make it as jumbled as possible so that unless you actually study medicine, you don't know what you're looking at. But it's just a bunch of data that really could have nothing to do with it. Now, if you think that's pretty good, just wait. Just wait. It's absolutely hilarious. As Gideon the Health Nerd pointed out over on Twitter, he ran the simple calculations looking at basically what the study wasn't really trying to report on. You see, the thing is, when you put a bunch of numbers out there, people can do their own calculations, and they want you to look at this number, this idea of an increased possibility of death due to these cardiac conditions, even ones that it's physically impossible for a vaccine to cause. But they also left in these numbers about non-cardiac related deaths, and what it showed was in that age bracket, 18 to 39, young men aged 18 to 39, a whopping 45% reduction in non-cardiac related death. That's weird. To put this another way, to really try and hammer home what the problems of this study are, there is no attribution. There's no author. We don't know who wrote this. The things that they try and claim that the vaccine could possibly cause so that they can get that statistical number don't make any sense. We also have no idea if any of these numbers are accurate. There's no way to verify any of this. We don't know which lab or group wrote this paper and when they did it. But also on top of that, their own shoddy science shows that the vaccines overwhelmingly were causing people to die less of non-cardiac related things. It's so sloppy. It's amazing. It's amazing. I know to like most people out there, if they don't work in medicine, they're not used to statistics, they're not used to like bio data and studies and things like that. This can seem quite a bit confusing, and that's okay. That's totally understandable. I do this more or less for a living. But you have to understand that if you were in the position of working in this field and you saw this, this would be like somebody, say, having to write an essay in high school and showing up with one sheet of paper with incoherent crayon scribblings on it. Okay? Yeah, that's what the Surgeon General of Florida is trying to push. But this is where I think we really have to talk about the politics of this, because this is not done for science. This is done for politics. This isn't even done out of people's legitimate belief in anti-vax. No, they're capitalizing on people's belief in anti-vax in order to push, well, basically a distrust and fear of the medical community, and to instill in this idea of conspiracy and the evil elite and Fauci. Ooh, Fauci is trying to get you. And this is all done for politics, not for science, not even remotely. You see, when you're talking about real science, science has to be objective. Like, for instance, I can tell you that, yeah, there is an increased risk of myocarditis after vaccination. That's true. That's absolutely true. I can also tell you that it's rare. It could be rare. That'd be nice. But it's also overwhelmingly not serious. Maybe shortness of breath, maybe a little bit, your chest hurts a little bit. You know, palpitations, basic things like that. I mean, I remember if I got a flu shot a few years back, I'd feel like crap for a day. Maybe I had some myocarditis. I don't know. But usually these are very, very light symptoms. And there's no reason not to get vaccinated because of that. Unless you have like an actual serious health condition where you worry that your heart might not be in the best place, well, then that's exactly one of the reasons why you need everybody else to get vaccinated, because then they can help protect you. That's science. That's science. You know, this is admitting the limitations of what we have and then advocating for what is still going to be the best possible outcomes for everybody. But I digress. Let's listen to the esteemed Surgeon General of Florida talking to Tucker Carlson.
The response to this is shocking. You would think people would want to know, because unless I'm misreading that summary, this is a big deal finding, is it not?
Tucker, it's an enormous deal. I talk to people, and there's been so much confusion, as you know, over the past few years, that people have trouble sometimes even identifying when something has so clearly crossed the line.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is the way it's being phrased is that this has now crossed the line. Now we have this bombshell thing. It doesn't bear investigating that this guy was one of America's frontline doctors, and even before we understood the science behind COVID at all, he was already protesting and raging against it. He himself has recommended hydroxychloroquine as a treatment. As we all know, that doesn't work. But, you know, no, it's fine. This is the smoking gun. This is where everything's going to change finally.
So
Yes.
I ask people sometimes who are still, hemming and hawing about this, if this vaccine, if it had been known 2 years ago or so that this vaccine would increase cardiac deaths in young men by 84%, would they have approved it?
Man, if only somebody had fraudulently made this bullshit anonymous scientific report 2 years ago, then more people would be dead. Dang. Jesus.
The obvious answer is no, you would never give something to someone who was young and healthy and increase their risk of dying from sudden cardiac death by 84%. But people are often...
I like how frozen Tucker's face is. Like, this is just absolutely shocking. Like he's not in on it.
And their response is, well, I don't know, COVID's pretty bad. Yes, COVID can be terrible, but we don't give people medications that kill them. So there's been so much confusion, but Yes, that was our finding. And
You know what's fascinating about that too is even if you take the horrifically bad numbers that they even have in that paper and you stack them up against the risk of, well, dying from a heart-related illness due to comorbidity with COVID-19, even with their made-up, make-believe numbers, it still protects you better than if you don't get vaccinated. But again, they're not saying that because that's not what they're trying to do. They're not trying to do science. They're not trying to be objective. This is politics. And the chips that they are gambling with are literally our lives. Yeah.
and it was a surprise, but that's what the numbers show.
Well, it's shocking, and it has. I mean, considering 200 million Americans took this drug at gunpoint, they were forced to.
You guys remember when they pointed guns at us and made us get vaccinated? Everybody remember that? Do you remember that? Gosh, it's like it was only yesterday.
This has massive implications. There are 50 states. Why is yours the only that's telling us this?
Well, I think, frankly, it's because we are the only one that's asked the question. And, again, it's just a reflection of how many things have been so backwards during the pandemic. Of course, you look more closely at cardiac adverse events when you already know that the vaccine is increasing the incidence of myocarditis in young.
And it's interesting that he says that because that's exactly what people have been doing. It's true. Scientists who actually work on this, which is not Dr. Ladapo, they have been studying and paying very close attention to adverse heart effects because specifically of the fact that there is an increased risk of myocarditis that everybody acknowledges. And what have they found? The people who are actually brave enough to put their names onto the actual piece of paper doesn't exist.
Young men by 10, 20, 30 times. I mean, that's what the studies show. So, of course, you should look for that. But instead, like you said, they're just hoping that somehow this goes away. This isn't going away. This is real. And
we know we can't get rid of you. At this point, and this is, okay, we have to talk about something real quick. Over 4 years ago, I started doing a series where I was tackling Vaxxed, the horrible, horrible documentary. And back then, anti-vaxxers were not that big. It was still a growing concern. It was still an absolute horror show. It was the worst case scenario, I thought. Then COVID happened, and now their ranks have swollen. And if you feel like that has put me in a bit of a nihilistic doomer attitude, yes, it has. But I digress. We don't get anywhere if we just give up. So the fight continues, even in the face of what is happening now. Tucker Carlson has the most popular news program on the most popular news network in the country, and he routinely blasts out anti-vaccine propaganda. Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast in the history of ever, routinely puts out anti-COVID conspiratorial content. This is everywhere, and now we have the surgeon generals of elected politicians that as well blast out anti-vaccine propaganda. And you have to understand that they do this not for the same reason like the anti-vaxxers of old. They did it because they believed that vaccines could harm their children. So as much as they might have annoyed the shit out of me, I could give some respect to them because they at least were acting in the best interest of their children. I can understand that. You can understand that, right? But this is inhuman. This is evil. Legitimately evil. Because they don't do it to try and save anybody. These people know better. Of course they know better. They do this for politics. They do this for politics and they don't care how many people get hurt. They don't care how many fucking kids die. They don't give a shit. They're never going to give a shit. This is the collateral by which they shake their hands and roll the dice. They manipulate, they twist, they deceive everything they can to maintain their own base of personal power. This is what it's about. And this is where we're at. Now, one of the last things I want to mention, too, is Dr. Simone Gold that I talked about earlier. She's an insurrectionist. She did the circuit quite a bit. In fact, she was actually at quite a few of the Reawaken America tours. And that video that I went undercover for is still coming out. but it's bleeding into everything now. This video that I'm making right here has a lot to do with it. There is so much that is continuing to go on. It is flabbergasting and crushing, and I'm doing my best, despite having been sick for the past 3 weeks. Doing my best. But yeah, I just, you have to pay attention, and you have to plead with your family members, with the people that you care about. When they see this kind of stuff, you have to do your best to patiently try and explain to them that this is not the case. Very, very simple. Go and find the study. It's easy to find. Go and look at literally any other scientific paper. Take those two, hand them to them. Ask them what the problem is. It should be very obvious, right at the top. It should be 100% obvious. How do we even know that this was legitimately done and it's not just make-believe? Because nobody can investigate it because there's no name on it. Anyway, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for your attention and your consideration in this video. I do have a Patreon. It pretty much has taken over the only way I make money off this channel anymore because the YouTube algorithm does not like debunking content. What are you going to do? For more of me, I have a second channel where I do, like, crappy throwaway politics videos. I do have my third channel where I do movie reviews and soap opera stuff, actually. And you should always check out my Twitch, twitch.tv/RealJeffHoliday. And yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate you. From my family to yours, I hope you are well. I hope they're well. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.